The phrase trauma bonding has become more popular in the last several years, and I often hear people referring to trauma bonding as like an oversharing of your traumas, an oversharing of information, often too early in the relationship. And I want to use this episode to really define what trauma bond is, because that's not what trauma bond means. And if you've ever been trauma bonded, you know that it is a psychologically painful experience that often accompanies abusive relationships. So in this episode, we're going to really unpack what trauma bonding is. We're going to talk about what makes you susceptible, it's a hard word to say, susceptible to it. We're going to talk about the science behind what is actually happening in your brain chemistry when you are becoming trauma bonded and in your childhood that set you up for these types of experiences in your adult life. We're also going to go over the stages of trauma bonding and what to look out for. It's really my hope at the end of this episode that you have a clear understanding of what trauma bonding is and a clear guide that you can use to help you understand and recognize if you are trauma bonding so that you can get out of the cycle. And be sure to stick around to the end of the episode where I will pull an oracle card that will offer you a specific message that you can use this week as you stay more conscious in your healing. Welcome to Heartbreak to Wholeness, the podcast helping you heal from the mindfuck of narcissistic relationships and move towards the secure, peaceful woman you want to become. We will explore all of the tools that you need to get through your griefs, to move past those I'll be alone forever fears, and rebuild your confidence so you can move forward in healthy relationships as your full selves, never to get sucked into the narcissistic spell again. I am your host, Bre Wolta, relationship clarity coach and EFT certified practitioner. Let's dive in. Welcome back. To start this episode, I want to share a quote with you that really was like one of those gut-punching moments when I read it. The quote is, "The people that we find the most charismatic are subconsciously triggering us to fall back into old negative patterns. This kind of instant chemistry can be a danger sign, indicating that self-defeating roles from childhood are being reactivated beneath the surface." This is a quote that was originated by Jeffrey Young, and it's in the book called Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, which is a beautiful read if that title resonates for you. I love that quote because the charisma and the magnetism that we feel towards people, seeing it as that reactivation of trauma, which is why we're so drawn, almost like a moth to a flame, so beautifully describes what that experience is like. So trauma bonding explains why we feel magnetized to people who hurt us and why we feel incapable of leaving them. The term trauma bond was coined by a man named Patrick Carnes. He's a PhD. And in 1997, he shared his work that was titled Trauma Bonds, Why People Bond to Those Who Hurt Them. And what he says in those findings is a trauma bond is a bond between two people where the victim has a psychological response to abuse, which develops into love and sympathy and empathy for the abuser. So trauma bond is a type of repetitive compulsion. Repetitive compulsion is our unconscious attempt to try to relieve a past emotional experience with a current situation. We're trying to heal a past wound with a current person in order to try to find resolution. So we're thinking that our current attachment figure is the person that can fix our original attachment wounding from our past attachment figures. So if we think about trauma based on a childhood of trauma, say you grow up in a very traumatic experience, specifically with your primary caregivers, we have neural connections that are associating love with unhealthy or dysfunctional or abusive behavior. And when children are children, we need our caregivers in order to survive. So attachment and connection become as important as food and water for a child. So we learn how to continue to turn towards this attachment figure even if they are the ones who are causing the abuse, the neglect, or the otherwise dysfunctional behavior. So we turn towards that person even when we feel threatened, because our survival is dependent on it. Children are inherently self-centered. They think everything is about them, so they don't understand that mom's drinking, for example, is about mom and mom's alcohol problem and not about the child not being lovable. But the child can't really make sense of that, especially in our younger years. And so we adopt all of these narratives and all of these maladaptive ways of coping with the abusive behavior or the neglectful behavior in order for us to continue to turn towards that abusive person in order to get our need for attachment met, even if it's painful. So neurons that fire together, wire together, and your association with love and connection is now with pain and dysfunction. So that becomes your template for relationships. It is the familiar template that you will find in your adult relationship if you were programmed that way in childhood, if your neurons fired together to create that association with being mistreated equaling love. So, in knowing just that little bit so far, you can see that this is not the same as bonding with somebody over the same trauma. That's the way the term is most oftenly misused. It's like, oh, I so trauma bonded with that person, meaning we both overshared or shared too quickly our traumas. That is an unhealthy part of relationships, but that's not trauma bonding. This is a much more serious psychological effect that happens in abusive relationships. So it's not just a challenging relationship. Trauma bonds aren't just painful relationships. They are activating our deepest wound around security and attachment. They are activating our definition of love, and we keep moving towards that person that's hurting us because we keep thinking we're going to get love and connection from them. So this is why it feels almost impossible to understand why you feel such a magnetic pull to the person, why you keep going back to the person, why it feels almost impossible to imagine life without them. So if you have separated and you're finding yourself really ruminating on that person and speaking about them as, the only person you'll ever love and the one you'll never get back, right? These types of like big absolutes, idealizations. That's how it feels with these types of bonds. It feels like life or death. So when we're drawn to abusive people who have a familiarity to our trauma, we're often describing them as our soulmate, our twin flame. We're saying things like, oh no, there's just something about them. Or it's just so special, I don't have words, or words that can't describe it. Or we believe that we'll never be able to find anybody as perfect as they are ever again. So it really is this idealization of the person, idealization of the bond, the connection. And really what is happening there is because there's such an idealization and there's such a need for that bond to give you a sense of safety and security, you will make excuses for their inappropriate, abusive, or neglectful behavior. Often you will hyper-focus on their every want and need and try to fix it or do whatever you need to do to make them happy. And a lot of times, unfortunately, that means that we're going against our values. So we're doing things that they want that don't align with who we are. But the need for them to stay, the need for them to be okay with you is so much stronger, right? That need for connection is activating this wounded inner child who just so desperately needed that connection in order to survive. So these relationships feel, in the beginning specifically, and we'll talk about the stages here shortly, they feel like euphoric chemistry. They feel like an overwhelming sense to your body, to your physical body, your mental self, your spiritual self, as like, I have found the person, right? I'm attaching to the person that's going to save me. It's not backed up by safety or security or stability. It's really often like fear and arousal. We're feeling fear, we're feeling anxiety, and we're so aroused by this person. We're so magnetized, right? There's chemistry. That is being confused with passion and vulnerability. So we're not actually being vulnerable with the person. The person's not actually being vulnerable with us. It's just this fear and arousal cocktail that's kind of getting spun up, and it's diffusing our sense of love, because we're just looking for that person to connect to, despite what they're doing. So these relationships can feel like roller coasters. They can feel like the highs are incredibly high, the lows are incredibly lows. And we're really experiencing a lot of false promises. And we'll get into this again in the stages. But there's false promises that we almost rewrite as affection. So, he's promising that he's going to go to therapy. He's promising that he's going to stop lying and stop cheating. That means that he loves me. So the promises aren't actually coming true, but the fact that they're saying it is almost enough to confirm the attachment, to confirm the love, quote unquote. And this feels like an addiction. This feels like I can't stop going back. I know it's bad for me, but we keep going back. And there is a component in our brain that happens where oxytocin is actually being released. And it's being released at really high levels after periods of neglect, which is even more impactful to the body and the brain in that connection, right? Oxytocin is the love chemical. So when we get that, our bodies are getting saturated with oxytocin, and that feels really good. It feels really good when you're in the high place on the roller coaster. It feels really good, which is enough to erase what it feels like when it's really bad. And not only are you erasing when it feels bad, but often you are taking the blame. You are making it your fault. You are making excuses. So let's talk about the stages, because I think that will really paint a whole picture around what trauma bonding looks like. And for the listener, I'd be really interested to see how many of these you're nodding your head to and you're like, oh my God, that's what that was. Hopefully it's looking in hindsight, being able to see what it was. And if you're in it, we'll talk about some resources at the end that can be helpful. There are 7 stages to the trauma bonding cycle, or trauma bonding stages. And these will feel similar or sound similar to the narcissistic cycle, if you're familiar with that cycle. So as we go through, we might be like, oh, that sounds familiar. And that's because a lot of narcissists are also abusers. So they're in the trauma bond cycle, okay? So the first stage is love bombing. Love bombing is where it feels like it's too good to be true in the beginning. This is taking the beginning of a relationship and all of the oxytocin and the dopamine and putting it on steroids. It is full of idealization. That is also a hard word to say. Mostly of them idolizing you. So they are paying really, really close attention to the things that you are hungry for, and they will flood you with them. So sometimes we think of love bombing as just fancy gifts and trips, which might be so if the person has money. But if the other person in this case doesn't have money, or maybe gifts aren't something that really motivates you, then love bombing can look like love notes. It can look like texting you all day long. It can look like words of affirmation. It can look like buying you a lot of one specific thing. Say you love penguins, and they're buying you stuffed animals, and they're finding penguin videos, right? They're just flooding you with all of these things that you have shared that mean a lot to you. Love bombing is a way for them to really like oversell themselves and the relationship. So you're like, this is it. I found my dream guy. There's no one else for me. This is my soulmate. He's perfect. He's everything I want him to be. It can also look like them starting to take interest in all of your hobbies and suddenly liking all of the same things you do. And again, it's really mirroring to you what you want in a relationship. It's mirroring to you what you've shared is important to you. So of course you're like euphoria in this stage because it feels fucking good. It does. It feels really good. As someone who has been love bombed, it's hard to be in it and be like, I don't want this, because it feels good. So the second stage is trust and dependency. And this is where the person will really start to make promises that they won't fulfill, right? They'll start to paint this picture of this incredible life that you're going to have. And sometimes there's even a provoking that they do to you in order for you to start to question them or question their seriousness around whatever. And once you start questioning them, that gives them the entry into start guilting you, saying, how could you think that after all that I've done for you in this love bomb phase? They wouldn't say that, but that's what they mean. After all that I've done for you, after all that I've shown you, after I've told you I loved you, I've told you that I want to marry you, how could you think this about me? How could you question this about me? So it really starts to solidify our dependency on them being okay with us. And you really start to long for their love and validation and acceptance and do whatever you need to get it. So a lot of walking on eggshells can start in this phase. The third phase is criticism. This is really when you feel like the honeymoon is over, when they're starting to really pick at your qualities and tell you things about your body or your friends or your family that somehow is your fault or somehow is causing fault in the relationship. They can be saying things like, you're too emotional, you're too needy. We wouldn't have problems if you weren't picking fights all of the time. They're really reacting to your sadness, your concern about the relationship, and placing blame on you. You're the problem. Your values are the problem. You wanting this thing is the problem, right? It's a lot of deflecting. And it's such in contrast to the love bombing stage that you can't make sense of it. You can't make sense of why this person is no longer showering you with all of the things that they did in the beginning. So the only really rational thing that we do is start to blame ourselves. Oh, I must have done something. And as they are telling us these things that are not right about us over and over again, it really starts to slowly solidify as truth. And then we move into the fourth stage, which is gaslighting. And this is really if it was starting to solidify in the last phase, it's really rock hard in the gaslighting phase, because you're actually questioning your reality. You're questioning your perception. You're questioning your sanity. You're starting to think that you're crazy. There's a lot of false accusations. There's a lot of lying. There's a lot of them saying things that happened that didn't. There's a lot of blame shifting or deflecting. When you try to bring something up to them, again, it's your fault. How could you think that I was cheating on you? How could you think that after all I've done for you, right? When they actually are cheating on you. And that's the problem, but it turns into you accusing them being the problem. It is crazy making. And as somebody who has been gaslit, I can tell you that it happens slowly. And because you admire and love and are bonded to this person, often this person that you believe you're going to marry, that you have loyalty to on some level, there's a lot of resistance to believing that they could be doing these things on purpose. So again, we default into the self-blame. It must be my fault. I must have misremembered that wrong. I said the wrong thing and set him off. We are making excuses for their behavior, all while really questioning our intelligence, questioning our memory, questioning our ability to be present. It can feel very distressing to be in that gaslighting phase. After gaslighting, we move into resignation. So because gaslighting is so distressing and overwhelming and doesn't make any sense, it's almost like your body, your brain, your tenacity just shut down. You just give up. It's not worth it. It's not worth the fight. It's not worth speaking my mind. It's not worth trying to set the boundary. And you just yield. You yield to the partner. You do whatever you need to do to try to stabilize the relationship, to try to stop rocking the boat, and you just feel utterly confused and hopeless. Oftentimes in this stage, we're thinking, if only I could do better. I need to go to more therapy. I need to figure this out. This is my responsibility. And often the partner is validating that it is your fault and that you should go to therapy and that they support you going to therapy, which is a confusing piece of love and admiration that we're like, oh, he cares about me. In the midst of me feeling crazy and not being able to have conversations where I can leave clear-headed, he thinks I should go to therapy and he supports that. After the resignation, there's a loss of self. So the 6th stage is loss of self. Really losing your sense of who you are, who you were before the relationship, hobbies, friends, family, things that you like to do. There's no more boundaries, if there ever were boundaries. Your light has dimmed. A lot of times when people get out of abusive relationships, will say like, wow, you look brighter. Your light came back on. And I think of this as you having this energy leak that's just pulling all of your energy, all of your life force, all of the beautiful things that light you up uniquely to you is just draining out the bottom. So your self-esteem is chipped, cracked, broken, shattered, and you're starting to feel really isolated. You're in a lot of shame because you don't understand what's happening and you have nobody that you can really talk to about it, nobody that you can turn to. And the relationship with the person is oftentimes the last attachment that they have. And because this attachment to this specific person, despite the abuse, because of the familiarity of equating abuse with love, it is a very strong attachment, right? The stakes are really high. So to leave that is incredibly challenging because, again, it feels like that life or death. It feels like that child who needs that connection in order to survive because it's in fact activating that childhood wound when that was the case. This is why it is so hard for women to leave. They can't imagine losing it. They can't imagine being alone. We start to go into the fear spiral of, I'm going to be alone forever. There's never going to be anybody else like him. Often they're telling us that too, right? I'm saying us in all of this because I've been through the exact experience. So they're telling us that we're worthless. They're telling us that we'd be lucky if a man would ever choose us again. So it's not just that we're putting ourselves in self-blame and criticism. We're also getting fed it, which really makes it feel like it's true. So the 7th stage, after we're feeling like we've totally lost ourselves, is the emotional addiction to the cycle. We're so desperate to get back to the love bomb phase, to get back to when things are good. We're so desperate for that connection and attachment that we'll take the crumbs. The person that you're with will give you little breadcrumbs, will give you one apology, will take you on a trip, right? And it wipes out all of the stages before. It is enough to hit that dopamine, hit that oxytocin, and keep you in that cycle. And then the cycle starts all over again. So when we return to those positive stages, it's the reinforcing of they must love me. oh, he's apologizing because he must love me. He didn't mean all those other things. He's taking me on this trip because he must love me. And it reinforces self-blame. It keeps you stuck on the potential of the future. I call this place the potential land. We kind of dissociate to potential land, because if I'm living there where things can get better, I don't actually have to acknowledge what's happening in reality and how bad things are. I don't actually have to leave this attachment connection that feels like life or death. So trauma bonding is not just you overlooking red flags. This is a chemical reaction that's happening in your brain based on past neurowiring in your childhood. So it's not that you're crazy because you can't leave the person, or you're crazy because you didn't see the red flags for so long. You're really having to work uphill against your body chemistry and everything in you telling you that safety is with this person. So if you've been in that situation, I want to just normalize, like, there's so much happening beyond your willpower. So having a professional to help you, having support, whether be it friends or family, to help get you out of that situation, maybe before you can even make sense of it, that is necessary to try to remove yourself from these situations. So let's talk about how you can avoid trauma bonding. If trauma bonding is based in our trauma, in what we experienced in childhood, then for you to be aware of your trauma, be aware of your patterns is vital. So you taking the time and doing your self-work with your individual therapist or coach to become aware of what happened in my childhood. What did I experience that was traumatic? And I know looking at that is challenging, but the trauma will continue to run your life whether you know it or not. So for you to be in control of your life, being able to see the trauma is how you can heal it and how you can shift it from perpetuating into your adulthood. In my signature program called Becoming, we actually have an entire module around reliving chaos, why we relive chaos, why we attract these people. It takes all this information and goes into so much depth with exercises and support to help you make sense of what happened and how it's playing out and how you can shift it. Because it's such an important, vital piece in your healing. You have to know what you're working with. The second thing that you can do to help avoid trauma bonding is to set your boundaries and to know your non-negotiables. This is another piece of the program, Becoming, that we go into depth around, because if you don't know who you are, what you stand for, what you'll walk away from, that's when we get into this really messy situation of justifying behavior, of just acquiescing, of really needing that person to be okay instead of like, I'm choosing this person to add to my life. When we know who we are and we have boundaries, we're not entering into relationships from that place of desperate need. So setting boundaries early on in relationships so that you can see how the person reacts is also very important. The third thing that you can do is really put time into building your self-esteem so that you actually have the confidence to walk away. You have the confidence to say, this doesn't feel right. This feels too familiar. I'm walking away. Another thing that you can do is ask yourself, how safe do I feel with this person? Oftentimes in these trauma-bonded relationships, we're feeling a lot of anxiety. And anxiety isn't excitement, okay? It's not the same chemical reaction in our body. It could feel similar, but are you feeling a lot of anxiety? Are you feeling a lot of rumination, a lot of preoccupation with this person? Like you need them to text, you need them to show up, you need to go on the date, you need. What are you feeling? Do you feel safe? Is there safe to have space? Is there safe to move slow? Because trauma bonding is based in unconscious magnetism, it's our subconscious that's really working to find the familiar, attract it, and try to hang on. It's really important that you can consciously name the things that feel good to you about the other person. So if somebody is to ask you, like, what do you like about this guy? It's not, oh, he's my soulmate. I don't know, it just feels different. I think he's the one, right? You can actually name specific things. So perhaps you say something like, he's really empathetic and he can hold space for my emotions consistently. Or we work as a team. When we have disagreements, we're really able to come together and talk about it. Or they value honesty. They value integrity. They value self-growth. You're paying attention to what they're valuing, not what you're saying you're valuing that they are becoming. Being able to recognize people's behavior over a longer period of time is also really helpful. So in the first couple stages, the love bombing, it's still active. So when we start to get into the further stages, it's important to be able to reflect and say, oh, you were holding space for me, but now everything's my fault. And being able to really see that difference, that dissonance, and then be able to acknowledge it, name it, confront it, and then walk away if necessary. So there is hope. There is hope for you if you have had a very traumatic childhood, specifically with your primary caregivers, and you find yourself repeating the cycle. You find yourself finding the same type of person, going through the same motions, or maybe you just got out of something that was really that eye-opening moment where you're like, oh shit, like I need to do some work around my trauma and who I'm attracted to. There's hope. You're not stuck there forever. I can tell you from experience that I had a very bitch slap moment from the universe where all of this came into clarity around my ex. And it helped me be able to see it in a way that I couldn't unsee it. And if you see it and you really take the reins and the seriousness around doing your work around it, you can shift out of it and you can experience healthy relationships. So let's recap what we went over. We talked about what trauma bonding is. We talked about how it happens, what makes you susceptible to it in childhood, why our childhood experiences set us up to be in trauma-bonded relationships in the future, the science behind it, what happens in your brain when you're younger, what happens in your brain when you're going through the actual trauma bonding experience, and the stages. So now you know all 7 stages that you can use to kind of help understand if you're in it, where you're in it, what's happening, what you can expect next. Sometimes having that clarity is helpful to be able to name what is happening to help get you out of that self-blame place. There's a lot of information, a lot of heavy information. So I want you to know that I have a link in the show notes for an interest form. And with that interest form, it will signal to me that we can have a free session and we can talk about where you are, we can talk about where you want to go. I can share how I help women get there. So I specialize in helping women really get out of these types of relationships and heal and recover so that you don't go back, so you don't have to experience the pain again. The link to that is in the show notes. And to end every episode, we pull an oracle card. So you heal me, God, words today are hard. You will hear me shuffling, and I'm going to just ask Spirit and the universe, what is the message that is intended for everyone listening right now? And we got untangle. So if you're watching the video, you can see that it is a picture of a knot, a rope that's knotted. And I'm going to read you what untangle means. A situation has you twisted and entwined with another, and it's time to untangle yourself. Seek clarity, know what is yours to own, and let go of the rope that has tied you up in this mess. You need not always be concerned with what everyone else does or thinks or wants from you. Loosen the threads so that you can find your own string. Follow the yarn that begins in your heart and weave your own tapestry for others to admire. No more twisting yourself up in knots of other people's expectations, rules, or control. Untangle yourself. Perfect message. I never pre-pull them. It's always fucking perfect. The biggest thing I want you to take away from today is that you're not alone. Please reach out to me, submit that interest form if you need support. You don't have to figure this out alone. You don't have to navigate it alone. You don't have to try to shift all this patterning alone. And in fact, you can't. Because these are relationship wounds, having that experience of a healthy relationship with a provider can be so tremendously healing. So healing. And it would be my honor to be able to walk with you through this, through something that I feel so intimately connected to, that I've been through myself, and that I want to help you get to the other side of. So until next time, I'll see you on the next episode.